I am Brother Cornell West.
This is Chris Hedges.
I'm Rosa Clemente.
Hey, what's up? This is Chuck D, Public Enemy Prophets of Rage.
And this is Newsbeat.
Peace and love, blessings and salutations, greetings and good evenings.
You sound like an extraterrestrial. If I knew an extraterrestrial sounded like, I would say that's it.
Hello, every peoples. I don't know. I don't have it written down, man. It's all freestyling. It's hip hop.
What is this world?
My name is Manny Faces. I'm the producer, co-producer, the audio editor, and the host of the Newsbeat podcast. And I am joined, as we are, for This Week in Social Justice with the managing editor of Newsbeat, Rashed Mian, and the editor-in chisel, a very chiseled indeed, Christopher Tawarski. How are you doing, gentlemens?
Good to be back on again for another week.
Yeah, no doubt, no diggity. Just to remind people what we're doing, this is This Week in Social Justice, a weekly live stream where we go into some of the ins and outs of the social justice world, examining media, news, issues, topics, and we bring special guests onto our live stream. So we appreciate you if you're tuned in and turned up with us. Hello to Michael Doggett. Peace to you. Loves the 8 o'clock start time. Well, if it works for your schedule, then
we got to keep it this way.
Unless you're being smart because we were 2 minutes late. But it's all good. Thank you, Mr. Doggett. Good to see you, sir. So yes, to remind people who are tuning in live, we're on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitcheroo, either on the Newsbeat Twitch or the Manny Faces official Twitch. So I appreciate you for checking us out on either one of those platforms. To remind people, we are actually in our heart and souls a podcast, not a live stream.
Definitely click that like, follow, and share on whatever stream you're watching, just to make sure other people notice us tonight and every other Wednesday night.
Indeed, but we are a podcast. Sorry, I was distracted. Thank you, Rashed. We are a podcast. We have a new episode that has actually hit the feeds recently. We've been doing this for about 3.5 years, bringing you a mixture of hard-hitting social justice journalism, tackling many of the issues that you hear about in the news, and obviously activists and people fighting the fight for justice, but often before the mainstream or the big thing happens that it becomes the talk of the town, we're digging into a lot of these issues beforehand. So please do check out Newsbeat, 2 words, one love, wherever you find podcasts, your streaming app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Joey's Podcast Shack. If you're there for you get a bucket and it's got audio bits and it's you also get
headphones.
There you go. So there's where you can find us, and that's our main steez, to quote the inimitable guru. And what we're going to do is give you a few tidbits of social justice news, information, stuff that's actually, I got one that's just hitting the wires, as it were. And then we will bring you a couple of guests tonight. Let's give them a quick rundown, Rashed and Chris, who we have visiting us in about 10 minutes or so.
Sure. So our first guest up tonight is Se Hyoung Yi. He's a professor at University of Houston, Clear Lake, and he's going to be coming on with us to talk about the anti-Asian hate crimes. But also, there was talk, as these hate crimes are happening, about like who were the perpetrators and the assailants. And there's for decades been sort of this government, I guess, induced tension between some Asian American groups, East Asian American groups, and Black Americans. And it's interesting to look into how that came about. And then later tonight, we're going to have Fatimah Loren Dreier, who is the executive director of the Health Alliance for Violence Intervention. And she's going to be talking about gun violence as a public health crisis, but also these vastly underreported gun crimes that happen across America every day that get basically no national attention.
Got it. Good guess. Good topics. Bad topics, but obviously important topics. This is all, of course, in the aftermath of 2 very tragic situations that have happened in the United States. As we emerge from one pandemic, we go right back into our others. So we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. First and foremost, this is something that we like to call our News Beat News Bite. So first and foremost, a couple of quick tidbits of information. I had one and I erased it. It was usurped by a brand new piece of news. Yes, indeedy. And now I lost where I was going to say, like breaking news. It all happened. It's all happening live, guys. And
the Fox News host who said that the secretary had resigned during her interview with Trump.
Was that it? No, that's not what I want. This is what we want here. So just minutes ago, I guess, I don't know if it was minutes ago, it was probably earlier today, but minutes ago, I saw this. The Maryland governor, Larry Hogan, settled a $577 million settlement with historically black colleges and universities. It's a $577 million over a decade. This was a measure, a settlement that a lawsuit dating back, as you see, to 2006, alleging that the state had underfunded these institutions while developing programs at traditionally white schools that directly compete with and drain prospective students away from the HBCUs. Were you aware of this lawsuit? I had heard about it very vaguely in the past. It had been going on for quite some time, and now a giant settlement to rectify or partially rectify this issue. Were you aware of this?
No, I did not. But sadly, I can't say I'm surprised. So
yeah,
it's one of those things that's sadly obvious.
Yeah.
I wonder how many other states have done the same thing.
Indeed. So we'll follow up on this, and for more information on this, it's all over the news wires right now. Washington Post has a story on it. This is from PBS. Nice. Check into that. I was not aware of this particular lawsuit. It was fascinating, and I think it's probably a win that this settlement, is happening. So that's my bite. What do you got?
Well, I got one on reparations, which.
Oh, you'll see my settlement. You'll raise me one. I get it.
I mean, this has been in the back end for quite some time, so I think everybody here can see that. But yeah, so the city of Evanston, Illinois, is going to make reparations available to eligible African-American residents for what it describes as, quote, discriminatory housing policies and practices and inaction on the city's part. And obviously, this is something that's been, reparations in general has been something that's been kicked around for a long, long time. And here's what seems to be the nation's first actual action into getting money out there. Now, there's critics, even among the city board that passed this. It passed 8-1, and the opposing council member basically just said, this isn't even anywhere close to what actual reparations have to be. And it's really just a housing initiative dressed up under the word reparations. Overall, I mean, it's a step forward.
Okay. Good bite. Nice bite. Thank you, Christopher. Rashed, why is my phone making noise? I apologize.
Yeah, we're all very current with our bites tonight. So I have Virginia becoming the 23rd state to abolish the death penalty, but perhaps most significant, the first Southern state to do so. So that law was signed today by the governor, and it goes into effect. And the interesting thing is that over its 400-year history, Virginia has executed the most people. I think the number is well over 1,300. And I think in the 20th century, in the 1900s, 3/4 of all those who were executed were Black Americans. So obviously, we already know that there's a disproportionate impact in terms of executions on Black Americans, and that sort of bears itself out state by state, including in Virginia. And I think this is also significant just because of what we saw at the end of the year in 2020. And it was this rush by the federal government, specifically the Trump administration, to go ahead with a surge of death penalty cases and to execute people at an astronomical rate, a rate that has been unmatched for decades. So this is good news on that front after a what you can only call a federal killing spree.
Right.
Last year. So definitely good news coming out of Virginia.
Very interesting to hear about as well. Our news beat, news bites, which make us do the flashy thing that you love so much. The links to all these stories obviously are in all of the comment sections of the chat room of wherever you're watching us. So if you're interested in these things, you can follow up on them. We've covered some of this stuff. I think we have some of these issues in the front burner, so to speak, for future episodes. So it is stuff that is always on our radar, and we are happy to bring them over to you in case you're not aware of them. So that's that. Packed show tonight. Let's keep it moving. Let's move it along. I don't want to spend too much time dilly-dallying and doing all the fun things we do. It's not necessarily a fun night. We have some serious topics to discuss, and our first guest is here in the green room. I will leave it to you, gentlemen, as we always do, as we usually do at about this time. Once again, your comments and questions are welcomed. Please contribute in the chat room, in the comment section of wherever you're watching us. Rashad, please introduce our guest. Take it away.
Yeah, great. So we're very lucky tonight to have Se Hyoung Yi. He's the professor of political science at the University of Houston Clear Lake, and we're happy to have him on. Thank you for joining us today, Professor.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Very sort of sobering episode that we have, talking about some of these tragedies that have happened over the last couple of weeks. Professor, so we contacted you because I had read the study that you had co-authored about Korean Americans and Black Americans, and specifically in the context of what happened in Georgia last week and the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. So we thought it was important to have a deeper discussion about discrimination in this country. So can you give us a brief history of how Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and I know that Asian Americans, as you said in the email exchange with me, covers a wide swath of people across the globe, but how they've been discriminated against in the United States throughout history?
Yeah. So first, here is some sort of like a disclaimer.
Yeah.
So when we talk about like Asian population, actually, we are actually talking about almost like 1/2 of the world population. So there are a lot of different racial groups and ethnic groups in Asia. So it may not be easy for us to lump all those different racial groups and ethnic groups in Asia into a single demographic category. So, and then so with that said, actually, I may not be able to speak for the whole Asian American community, or even I cannot say that I can represent the Korean American community, right? And to be honest, I mean, there are even like different perspectives, radically different perspectives about among Korean immigrants and Korean Americans, about how to perceive America, how to perceive this sort of like new country, right? So that's the thing. I mean, for example, I personally am not a citizen yet, right? I'm an immigrant, thankfully with a green card, right? But I am not a citizen yet. And then whenever I talk to other Korean immigrants, especially who came to this country, like say, like 40 years ago, even like 50 years ago, and I find a fundamentally huge gap about their perception and my perception of what America is and who Americans are, right? So there's that. So this is the disclaimer, right?
Yeah, appreciate that, definitely.
Sure. So I think our time is kind of limited, so we cannot obviously go over the whole history of Asian American immigration. But let me just say this. I think the first national census in the United States was conducted in 1830, right? So at that time, according to the census record, right, there were only 3 Chinese in the United States, right? But the Asian coolie laborers, right? The coolie laborers, coolie means actually salary. So basically, those coolie laborers were wage workers. But they were traded and worked just like other slaves and black slaves, actually, right? But anyway, these coolie laborers were already part of the virtual slave trade in the British colonies in Cuba and in the West Indies and South America throughout the 19th century, right? The first wave of Asian American immigration into the United States is known to take place around 1850s with the California gold rush, right? Of course, at that time, China was about to collapse, especially when they lost the Opium War to the British Empire. So basically, a lot of Chinese people, especially in the Cantonese area, right, they struggled a lot, right? So basically, they were brought to the United States basically as slave workers, right? And then the Chinese population started spiking, especially after the Civil War, right? So in some sense, in nature, right, basically the slave labor was replaced by penal labor in the South, right? But in other parts of the United States, basically Asian immigrants and Chinese workers, they replaced former slaves, especially during the construction of transcontinental railroad, right? So the American government was really worried about this kind of new, like foreign, strange immigrants and their presence, and then Americans perceive this kind of the presence of Asian Americans as a threat to the dominant norm and culture and system, social system in the United States, right? So since 1870s, Congress started legislating a lot of laws that denied Asian immigrants path to citizenship, basically, right? So I want to discuss about two specific laws. The first one is the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. Basically, this law banned any kind of immigration from China for 10 years. And this law was supposed to be renewed every 10 years. But actually, in 1902, Congress made it permanent. So basically, Congress passed a law that permanently banned any Chinese immigration to the United States. But I would like to talk a little bit more about the other law, that is 1875 Page Law, because I think this law is actually related to the tragedy in Atlanta, especially kind of like stereotyping Asian women as a sex object in some sense. Yeah. This is a very disturbing topic, right? But anyway, so what is the Page Law, right? This law prohibited the importation of unfree laborers and women, Asian women, brought for immoral purposes. So basically, this law specifically targets mostly Chinese and Japanese women. The law was based upon an assumption that those Asian women, right, they were basically prostitutes, right? And their presence will be really harmful and actually to the moral standard of the United States, right? But actually, the real intent of this law was to create a stereotype, a strict and stable stereotype about Asian women being a sex object. Of course, at that time, even at that time, not all Asian women were prostitutes at the time. And basically the reason why some Asian women had to go to the United States was because Asian workers working hard to construct a railroad at the time, right, basically, they could not find any American women to marry. If a white woman marries to an Asian man at the time, right, she would lose her citizenship, and naturally, basically, their children would be losing, would not be citizens actually, right? So even now we see, if you closely follow how this tragedy in Atlanta was framed and described by the mass media, actually you see kind of similar type of sexual stereotyping against Asian women, right? We really do not know what services those massage parlors provided, right? We may speculate, but we really don't know, right? And we certainly do not know the nature of those victims work there, right? And then even if they indeed provided some sort of sexual services, I'm not sure, I mean, what's wrong with that basically, right? And then why these Asian women deserve the doubts and hatred from the community, right? I see here another sort of like racist and almost like Puritan hypocrisy here, right? We just assume that it was only natural that those Asian women were targeted by a sex addict, right? Even some local newspapers, right? Even some local newspapers in Atlanta, right? They kind of insinuated that, oh, those massage parlors were a threat to community, right? Spreading some, like bad images of the community, and those women might even have been the victims of like human trafficking, right? So there are a lot of like layers in this like tragedy in Atlanta.
Thanks for those insights, Professor. I would like to get a little bit into your paper and talk about this concept of the model minority.
Yes.
And I just want to suggest to, we'll provide links throughout the night here to that paper. I want to recommend it to anyone viewing this, anyone listening, to check that out. It's just you go into such detail, and I'd like for you to discuss a little bit about how that concept was used to sort of drive a wedge between different racial groups.
Yeah, thank you for the question. This is a really important and relevant question. And then so first, I mean, I co-authored the article with Dr. William Hostin at Prairie View A&M University. He's a professor of political science there, and then he's an interim associate dean. And then so I mean, Dr. Hostin and I had a lot of time to talk about the concept of model minority and how this concept basically reshaped and invented the image of Asian Americans, and why this kind of reshaped image of Asian Americans has been utilized as a tool to divide and conquer all different races, racial groups, and ethnic groups in the United States. So basically, as I told you just before, the image of Asian Americans was basically very, very terrible, right? And then we might wonder when the image of Asian Americans started being shifted by the American society from yellow peril to model minority, right? So basically, the concept of model minority was invented during the Civil War. Civil rights era in 1960s, right, as a counterexample to so-called problem minorities such as Blacks and Hispanics who continuously questioned and challenged the system and disturbed like status quo, basically, right? So in 1966, William Patterson, I mean, he was a New York Times journalist. He wrote an article titled "Success Story: Japanese American Style." That was the title of his article, right? And in that article, he sort of like praised the success of Japanese Americans in American society and their ability to overcome prejudice, racism, and the label of problem minority, right? So basically, he was arguing that look at Japanese Americans, right? They went through a lot of difficult times, and then and the racism. Just think about the Japanese internment during the World War II, right? More than 120,000 Japanese. I mean, in the United States, they were relocated, right, involuntarily to more than 10 concentration camps, right, throughout the United States, right? So basically, William Patterson was saying that look at Japanese Americans, right, and look at how successful they are, right? They went through all these different difficult times and racism and discrimination, but they didn't complain, right? So they didn't complain the American system. Instead, they worked hard. They tried to assimilate themselves into so-called mainstream society in the United States, right? Those Japanese Americans were eager and willing to accept and internalize dominant norms and culture of the United States, right? So basically, he was, and then actually, I mean, at the very end of his article, William Patterson made a stark contrast between Japanese Americans and Black Americans, right? Doesn't mean so basically, so there's that, right? So the concept of model minority sounds like a huge compliment to Asian Americans, right? So Asian Americans don't complain, they work hard even when they are mistreated, right? They trust the American system, they try hard to be integrated to a mainstream society. And just look at Asian Americans. I mean, look at their high economic, social, and educational performances, even higher than white Americans, right? So basically, this model minority stereotype says that the American system, of course, may not be perfect, right? But it is not the main problem that you cannot succeed in this country, okay? So there is a racism, right? But racism is not the main problem why you cannot succeed in this country, right? So once this model minority title is assigned to Asian Americans, now Asian Americans function as a buffer zone, or some scholars say a middleman, right? In between white majority and other non-model minorities, right? Or problem minorities, right? Whatever you call. So this in-between position of Asian Americans in the racial hierarchy in the United States has made Asian Americans particularly vulnerable to the discrimination by the whites and misunderstanding from other minorities. So basically here, the divide and conquer tactic works, right? For example, I even heard an argument that Asian Americans they are simply free riders, basically, right? They just enjoy the benefits from the hard fight fought by Black Americans over the past 400 years, right? Even though Asian Americans have never been really treated any better than Black Americans, right? So this kind of image of model minority works as first, it works as a way to strengthen the legitimacy of American system. And second, it works as a part of divide and conquer strategy, right? So, yeah.
That's unbelievable, Professor. And just we have another guest coming on, so if I have one more minute with you. I was just wanting to know, do you sort of blame the model minority myth and these longstanding just discrimination and racism against different groups for sort of potentially the tensions that we still see today?
Can you tell me the question once more? Can you repeat that?
Oh
question?
yeah. Do you blame the model minority myth for potential tensions that still exist today among these groups?
Yes, of course. But the thing is, I mean, I do think things can change and actually are changing, right? So as I briefly discussed at the beginning of, this session, there are different perspectives among, for example, Korean Americans about how to see America. For example, especially Korean Americans who came to the United States in 50s or 60s, right? Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world, right? So it's kind of old generation Korean immigrants, right? I mean, they kind of have a room for acceptance, right? So basically, I mean, even though they were treated badly and unjustly, but still America was a better place to live, right? Basically, right?
Yeah.
So that is why this old generation, like immigrants, they tend to So I don't mean that they accepted discrimination, they accepted racism, right? It only means that at least America was a better place to live. And that is why there was a room for them to accept some kind of mistreatment, right? So they were basically saying that they can leave this country even though they would be struggling, would be struggling with some sort of like mistreatment and unjust, right? The new generation of immigrants, like those who came to the United States recently, like maybe including me, because this is my 14th year in the United States, right? Well, the things are different, right? Korea has become a much better place, so one of the economic powerhouses, right, in the world, actually, right? So Korea has become one of the richest countries in the world, basically, right? And Korea has like a fantastic social welfare system, national healthcare, national pension system, public transportation system, and Korea handled really well the COVID-19 pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So basically, this kind of Korean Americans or Korean immigrants, right, who come to the United States recently, right? They actually have a little bit more objective perspective to the United States, and they actually identify themselves with more like minorities, and they are more sensitive in the issues of social justice and racism, like that. Right? They do not certainly accept this kind of model minority stereotype, and I do see hope in that sense. The collaboration between Korean Americans, Korean immigrants, and second and third generation Korean Americans, and then other minority groups.
Well, Professor, there's so much to discuss about this topic, and it's really fascinating just to go through it, especially your paper. And I really encourage everybody to go check it out. If you want to just follow the links in our chats on our multiple streams, or just search for Demystifying Americanness, the Model Minority Myth, and the Black Korean Relationship. Professor, thank you again for coming on and educating us.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, that was unbelievable. A lot of the stuff we just learned over the last couple of days, and because of yet another tragedy. So we're grateful for the professor for taking time out to talk about this.
Let me, as they say in Clubhouse, reset the room. Let me reset the room right quick. You're watching This Week of Social Justice, the offshoot of the Newsbeat podcast. Once again, Newsbeat, 2 words, 1 love, wherever you find podcasts, social justice, hard-hitting social justice journalism, touching all the issues, mixed with our eclectic mix of music, original lyrics, often by hip-hop, brilliant independent hip-hop artists. We like to say it's like as if Democracy Now! And Black Thought had a podcast baby. Just to let you know who we are and why we're here. This Week in Social Justice appears live on your fancy little screens every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, like now, is basically, unless you're watching on the replay, then you missed it. Thanks to everyone checking in the comments. Please forward us your questions. Even during guest segments, we'll be happy to pass them along if time permits. And with that, Mr. Mian, please introduce our esteemed next guest.
Yep, and we're also grateful tonight to have on Fatimah Loren Dreier, who's the Executive Director of the Health Alliance for Violence Intervention. Fatimah, thank you for joining us.
Hi there, thank you so much for having me.
Fatimah, we really appreciate you coming on today, especially in light of some of the recent, mass shootings that have occurred in this country, the notable ones that's getting media attention. And we wanted to have this discussion because there seems to be, 2 different reactions when there is quote unquote mass shootings in America, right? It's the one that we're seeing now that's playing out on all our screens, and it's about gun reform and solutions of that nature. But there, especially last year, let's talk about last year, there was hundreds of mass shootings, perhaps exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which occurred disproportionately in communities in color, and they were largely ignored by the national media, right? So can you talk about how community groups are addressing this trauma and this violence, and also sort of the dangers of ignoring this gun violence epidemic that we've had for years?
Absolutely. So first, I just want to, again, thank you for having me and say that it's really powerful and very tragic that any community has to reckon with the trauma and the tragedy of losing a loved one. So, there is, we don't pit, victims against victims. Any sort of victimization is worthy of recognition, acknowledgement, and action, frankly. But what we know is this. Gun violence is the leading cause of death for Black boys and men. It's the second leading cause of death for Latino boys and men. It leads in terms of death for Black girls and women. So there's a disproportionate response, unfortunately, given the pervasiveness, the burden that we see in Black and Brown communities. And this is something we need to pay attention to. I work for the Health Alliance for Violence Intervention. We want to address racially equitable responses to violence. We particularly stand up hospital-based violence intervention work, which is part of a more comprehensive system of violence intervention strategies that focus on public health. It focuses on, first, we want to identify those who are at greatest risk of potentially being harmed. We provide wraparound care services that ensure that people aren't at risk to be harmed or potentially harm someone else, right? And we continue to monitor their progress and their transformation over time. And these sorts of programs, hospital-based violence intervention, and a whole range of others that comprise this comprehensive system, cities have boasted reductions of 50%, 40% in Oakland, in New York. These are really powerful. So I'm sure many of your listeners and you all might be asking, given this kind of effectiveness, why on earth would this not be the norm? Why wouldn't we invest in these solutions and have them be a part of our infrastructure? And that, I think, is the very thing we contend with, because we think that there's this kind of sense that it's normalized in Black and Brown communities, that violence is normal. It's something that those folks over there deal with. And that's something we radically want to change. We want people to, when they hear about shootings, they should think, how do we get to the lion's share of those who are experiencing violence? What can we do? And the answer is invest, and invest at scale. So that's what we promote.
And on that note, Fatimah, I know that your group is part of a coalition that's putting forth a $5 billion plan to combat some of this. So if you could explain to listeners and viewers just what that is and what it would entail.
Absolutely. I'm really proud at the Hobby to be a part of a larger coalition, a Fund Peace Now coalition that is led by Black and Brown-led organizations that focus on community gun violence. And first of all, we are starting with our current president, who, as a candidate, has actually spent much time over the years talking about and learning about these programs. So in Biden's plan on the campaign trail addressing gun violence, he included a $900 million commitment to investing in gun violence prevention strategies that I mentioned, these comprehensive public health approaches. But when we look, and this is over an 8-year period, right? So 900 million spread out over an 8-year period. But when we look at the actual burden of violence on our society, in that same period, we're talking over $2 trillion. And so we say, when we look at what it would take to do this sort of investment, $5 billion is a rounding error, quite frankly, and to invest that money up front. And again, we would take that $5 billion and distribute it over 8 years. We have a remarkable opportunity to provide relief for cities who've seen astronomical spikes in violence due to the COVID pandemic last year and are in dire need of relief.
And I'm wondering if you could sort of talk about the level, the amount of trauma that these communities are going through and how that's being addressed. I can't imagine just seeing some of these horrific numbers of just the number of shootings. I think it jumped by 4,000 in 2020 compared to 2019, and we're seeing another sort of spike this year. So can you just talk about addressing, because it is a public health crisis, as you say, addressing the trauma that people who are either impacted personally, but just on the periphery and how to deal with that.
Absolutely. I'm a trained psychotherapist, and we think very much about the trauma. You have to understand that when we talk about violence, as it's not just the person's family. If someone's killed, there are a number of non-fatal shootings, meaning people who've been shot and they survive, and they're going back into the community with tremendous PTSD. There have been studies that show that the level of PTSD we see in some of our Black and Brown neighborhoods rival that we see in war, right, among those who are actually on the battlefield. So we're talking about escalated levels of trauma, and left untreated, it can really change the brain. So there's a lot of brain science that looks at the impact of trauma, prolonged trauma, particularly for children who are exposed to trauma. And it has incredible impact over the life course. So it is not only the right thing to do, science backs up intervening and actually providing healing to ensure that people have, I mean, that's the good news, right? That this is not destiny, that if you experience trauma, and I'm a trauma survivor myself, that if you've experienced trauma, there are things that you can do, and education about what you can do is incredibly important, and providing the support is critical. What's powerful about these comprehensive approaches is that it focuses on how we can get at the root. So it's not only addressing the trauma by leveraging people from the community, hired from the community, who are credible messengers, who have themselves experienced trauma, who've seen it, and can share as a peer, as someone who's been there, say, I've been through this, it gets better, here's what we can do. But they also provide services, so housing, transportation, looking at employment opportunities. So it's connecting not only the trauma care, the therapeutic services, but also very concretely, what can we do to actually transform lives in the long term? So we think about trauma in a comprehensive way, because the trauma we've experienced, right, disproportionately, this is really critical. The communities that are experiencing this trauma, right, are the same communities that have experienced economic divestment, right, lack of housing, lack of food support, food deserts, redlining, right? These are the same communities. So that's a level of kind of what we call systemic trauma, systemic violence. And so we want to make sure that we have a therapeutic response, but also a systemic response to the needs of those who experience this level of trauma.
Chris, I think, oh, there he is. I think Chris has another question.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I just want to revisit to underscore that horrific statistic that you spoke about, and also it's on your material for your plan, that the number one killer, really, of African American men and boys is gun violence. It's the second most killer for Latino men and boys and African American girls. I mean, just as we're talking here, I think about something like cancer, or heart disease, and it's the number one killer. And what do? They pour billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. Everybody knows it. Everybody gets together to try to fight it. And then you see something like this that just does not get the attention it deserves. So I was just wondering if you could just underscore how this is a health crisis, and it should be seen that way, and it should be acted upon that way.
It is not only a health crisis, it's an emergency, right? And it's been one raging in our communities for decades. My own father, who's been in and out of prison most of my life, had a gun put to his head when he was a teenager, right? Living with that kind of trauma. That's where it begins. And that we've had this profound neglect, given the public health crisis, given this public health emergency, I think is incredibly problematic. But there is an opportunity today. The Biden administration and President Biden has an opportunity today to do something historic, to begin a new paradigm of addressing this issue. so that we can look forward and see significant reductions, and not only reductions, but also see young people transform their lives and be put on paths towards new prosperity, thriving, because we don't want to just end with did they or did they not commit a violent act or be injured. That's not enough. We want to talk about people who have incredible potential to contribute to society being given a shot. That's what we're talking about. They're given a chance to do what they want to contribute to society. That's what the opportunity is. And we think that we're encouraged by the way the administration has at least listened, but we are now hoping to see a real concrete, bold action and an investment of $5 billion in this effort.
And Fatima, I just have one last question, if you don't mind. And it's sort of on our podcast and on the show, we talk a lot about mass incarceration and the criminal justice system. And we've done episodes on restorative justice and alternative programs such as those. And just when I hear about the initiatives and strategies that your organizations and others employ to combat sort of violence and addressing harm, the people who have been harmed, and then sort of restorative justice, which is mediating after something terrible happens. So do you see your efforts as sort of part and parcel of a larger effort to invest, like they say defund police, but taking that money, investing in communities, and using all this for resources across a huge scope to address what's happening?
We are absolutely a part of an infrastructure, a new paradigm for the way that we can address challenges further upstream. A public health approach means we can actually go further upstream. We can identify those who are at risk. We can wrap them up with love, with support, with intervention, work with them to reimagine their lives, and leverage a workforce that has lived this work, is from the community. So they are seeing the people who are helping are people who look like them, right? We can do that level of intervention, and then we can continue to monitor their growth over years. We are not the only program. That's why I like calling it a comprehensive infrastructure, because I think it better communicates that we're talking about something robust that wraps around folks. So you mentioned incredible work that's happening in the restorative justice movement. We work on the hospital-based side because we know that people who are getting shot are going to the hospital, but we have our street outreach programs that are doing work out in the community before someone gets shot. We have peace fellowships that invest in those who are at highest risk, helping them, support them, build out a life map for their work, intensive life coaching. I mean, there's incredible, really robust, innovative work that's happening, and cities across this country are already beginning to invest. They need the support of the federal government to bring them to scale.
Hi, I just want to jump in. It's Manny Faces. Are you in New Jersey? Did I get that?
New Jersey City, yes.
Okay, I'm in Newark, New Jersey. Brick City represent.
Wonderful.
And I was going to ask you a question, but just to jump in on your last point, I know that the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, for example, working with youth prisons, there was some legislature that's kind of milling about trying to start a pilot program to help young people getting out of those situations get acclimated back into life. And these are the kind of community-based programs you're talking about that are happening on local levels, on state levels, that we just need to get more attention to on a national level.
Absolutely.
My question is, and we have links to the report and to your organization, and thank you so much for doing this. Are there things that the public can do? For example, I know for New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, they had a, call your congressman, that whole kind of campaign going on. What can the public do if they're interested in your your plan, your organization? What's the best thing that they could do to help out?
First of all, I believe you must call your congressman, call your senator, and ask them about what they are doing in Congress to promote and support investments in Black and Brown communities, right? Are you supporting funding peace? That is critically important. We ask that you come to social media, hashtag Fund Peace. You can find us there. You can also go to at the hobby. You can follow us, and we can kind of point you to resources and a whole host of others in our coalition who are doing this incredible work. Those would be incredibly important for us right now. We need to continue to apply pressure. Our website, www.thehobby.org, has this plan to fund peace that our coalition has worked on. It really breaks down the numbers, but right now we need Congress to act, and every person that makes a phone call, that puts out a letter that says that fund peace is important, we will have a drumbeat of people who say this matters, right? Black lives matter. Brown lives matter. We all matter. And this is an opportunity for us to contribute, again, historic level of investment, given this public health emergency that rages on.
Great, Fatimah. So we'll pay attention to what your organization and the coalition is doing as this moves forward. We really appreciate you coming on and lending these really important insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Incredible work.
Wow. So, you know, I think just one of the takeaways from both interviews is sort of just, you know, decades and obviously centuries of horrific policies, oppression, racism, and how that's impacting people today.
Indeed. Once again, shouts to everyone who's checked in. You can definitely scroll back through if you're watching us live. Scroll back through, find out all the links. We just had this. We just added this on the fly because that's how we do. Fun Peace hashtag the Javi online to find out more about what they're doing. And usually when you go to an organization like that, you find a lot of rabbit holes that you can follow down that will give you more information on these topics. The report is available at thejavi.org. The plan. Thejavi.org. We have it. We've shown you here what it looks like. Bing, bang, bong. There we go. And of course, you know, do what you can to support. Once again, as I was talking about the local level, this also happens on a national level where you can call, make your voices heard. The news bite that I picked tonight, I'm almost certain was led by grassroots movements. Which was the HBCU settlement in Maryland, $577 million lawsuit that went on many, many years. I would guarantee you that without public pressure, that probably would not have happened. I'm sure there were groups on the ground and grassroots stuff happening all the time. So that is the answer. You just got to do it, and you got to keep going. You got to keep pushing. So thank you to our guests for bringing great insight to these front of mind topics. But I don't know about you. When I listen to the mainstream news, I don't get this kind of nuance and this kind of insight. So I appreciate the work that you gentlemen do to find the people who can speak to these things greatly and share them with our audiences. Thank you for this. This was pretty dope.
Yeah. While she was talking, I couldn't just help think about sort of the coverage that these incidents get in these communities and how they're talked about as if they're all occurring in a vacuum. Right. And there's just no context whatsoever. And obviously it's easy to write a quick story, but I mean, I think these sort of conversations are important, and I wish they were happening, you know, more so on the cable news and other places.
I was gonna say, I just want them all to come here because we're having these conversations. So if they don't wish for them to be everywhere else, because then we wouldn't have the monopoly on it, but they should all be coming here. So therefore, if you're one of the people watching, we thank you so much. There's a million places you could there's like a bajillion places you could be right now, but you're here with us and you're listening to these issues and the way we bring them to you. So please tell a friend and tell some friends. Come through, hang out with us every Wednesday, 8 p.m. live. Don't forget, we're a podcast that you could find on all of your favorite podcast applications and your streaming apps, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, et cetera, et cetera. Newsbeat, we cover a lot of these issues. We do it in a kind of a flary way. We mix music, we mix hard-hitting journalism. We have the experts, we have the activists. We often have people who are affected by these issues. speak directly to these issues. And of course, folks like we had on tonight, who I suspect we will probably hear from again in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. I think we're just about out of time. Yes. And thank you to Sage, also in our incredible team in the background, putting up links all throughout the show. We appreciate you. Shouts to Jed Maury and Maury Creative Studios, the master mothership behind what we do here, a great digital marketing agency that also works for social responsibility and some of these topics. So they help make this happen. We appreciate them for that.
How cool is that?
Pretty cool. All right. So we've run out of time.
Oh man, we can't go another 2-3 hours like we did.
We can. We should. I want to extend the show. We're going to have to do it. But at 9 o'clock, it was like a 5-hour stream. That was fantastic. We will kind of continue this, and you guys will be on, I hope, for at least 2 or 3 minutes as we transition. Most channels you're watching may have this show. It's the Words I Manifest. It's my show. I'm coming on next at 9 o'clock Eastern on my Twitch channel, my Facebook, and my YouTube. So separate yourself from Newsbeat a little bit, but still stay connected. The boys will be back in town to show that audience what we went into tonight. And just so you know, this is a highly acclaimed new variety talk show that all the celebrities are talking about, including...
Hey, it's me, Billie Eilish. Make sure you're watching Words I Manifest every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. Don't be a bad guy. Duh.
So yes, please join us. What? You didn't know? Oh, you didn't know? You didn't know about multiple Grammy award-winning superstar Billie Eilish giving cash.
I did not know she'd be making an.
Very true.
Oh, come on. We all know. She's made several appearances.
She loves us.
Listen, we'll be talking about social justice issues. We'll be talking about some hip-hop culture and some independent artistry. I've actually got some good guests coming on tonight. We are talking about the independent music scene in New York City and places other than New York, but nationwide. How is the independent music scene going to bounce back in a post-coronavirus world, a post-pandemic world? It's a very important topic. A lot of our independent artists were smothered by everything that happened. And we're going to be talking about that. I have a guest who will be running a great town hall collective. We're going to get some people on to talk about that. And I'll be talking about some people that are going to be doing a fantastic contest. I just learned about this, a contest for young rap artists who will compete to all in the name of financial literacy and teaching about financial literacy. So
love it.
So that's what's coming on next. Words I Manifest. Thank you all for watching. I'm plugging my own thing. I will see you guys next week here on This Week in Social Justice. Any last words, gentlemen?
Quickly, Derek Chauvin trial apparently starts next Monday, so everybody stay tuned to that.
We will be bringing you more details along the entire way, the Derek Chauvin trial that's happening. So stay tuned to us for that. The same kind of cool way that we do it, that we did tonight. Yep. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.
Thanks.
Peace.
Peace and love. Thank you, Silent Night. Silent Night is busy. Our Newsbeat artist in residence. And thanks to everyone else tuned in tonight. Peace.